Story 1. Consider how little sleep they get and how many hours they work. Congratulations. You are wasting your life. Story 2. Proudly announcing that I do not have a filter. Well done. You lack a basic social skill. Also, this is usually said by the kind of person who later has a meltdown at the slightest perceived criticism. Story 3. How they passed the cognitive exam they were given. Aced it. Story 4. Their workload was heavy. I worked 60 hours last week. Well, that is really sad. Story 5. They have a famous ancestor. Half of the people in Europe and Asia carry Genghis Khan's DNA. Story 6. It is about where they are from or where they lived, especially when they act like that gives them some kind of credibility. Do not mess with me. I am from New York. This is not spicy. I am from Texas. This is not hot. I lived in Phoenix. Story 7. A child being in the 90th percentile on the growth chart is not a contest. Story 8. Almost anything posted on social media. Story 9. When someone brags about money and material achievements by listing purchases. Story 10. They are uneducated but have street smarts. Conversely, some people have multiple degrees but do not have the common sense to sit the right way on a toilet. Story 11. I have met people who have bragged that they have never finished a book. Story 12. I do not care that you bought a Rolex with a credit card or that you have an entry-level Mercedes you pay $1,200 a month for. The real flex is living below your means and staying out of debt. Story 13. They got so little sleep last night. Bitch, sleep is the best. Story 14. How much do they work? And how long has it been since they took a vacation? It is not healthy. What are you overcompensating for? Story 15. I'm brutally honest. Like, okay, you should be honest. Story 16. I have 160 or more hours of vacation time saved. That is not a flex. It is sad. Story 17. Being married to Ginny Sack and her mole, and I do not mean Mexican cuisine. Story 18. Their nationality. What are the odds that the country where you were born is the best in the world at everything? Story 19. Working outside work hours. My manager brags about spending his weekends planning lessons and answering emails. I do not find it impressive. It is sad he cannot manage his workload better. Story 20. My cousins always brag about how tall their son is. He is about 6 feet 3 inches. Although many people dislike bragging, laughing out loud, it is understandable when they boast about him being an honor student or a good athlete. However, being tall is no more of an achievement than having blonde hair. Story 21. Their children are smart, but 90% of the time they are just average. Story 22. Anything you are born with or into is not impressive. The only impressive things are what you make or do, not what you are given. Story 23. Buying Balenciaga clothing is an intelligence test, and you failed it. Do not brag about it. Story 24. When women brag about being a bitch and finishing the fight, you are not tough. You are obnoxious and repulsive. Story 25. I do not want to hear about anything someone else's children do. I have children myself, and I do not want to hear how awesome your child is at baseball or anything like that. Story 26. My parents brag that I do not drink tea. I do not see how that is something to brag about. Story 27. When you turn down a man and he says that he didn't even try to pressure you to hook up and that he respects you, congratulations, here is a gold star. Story 28. Destroying a piece of living history to build a dance hall for your rich pedophile friends. Story 29. Attending Ivy League schools does not mean a student is smart. It means the student's parents are wealthy. Story 30. Your body count, how many people you've slept with, is not that impressive. Bonnie Blue, I'm looking at you. Story 31. Being an enlightened centrist usually describes people who hold right-wing views but act apolitical. They are not being nuanced. They try to feel superior without committing to ideas. They ask questions without offering insight, pretend to be smart, come across as ignorant and smug, and cannot handle criticism. Story 32. I used to know a woman who always made big purchases and spoke as if she had carefully considered them and that they were major steps in her life. She did this when buying a car and her first home. She never worked full-time. It was always 5 to 10 hours a week, and she never held a job for more than 6 months. It is not normal to buy a house with that kind of income. She had a trust fund. Her parents were extremely wealthy, and she presented the things the trust fund provided as her own accomplishments. Story 33. Getting married and having children is fine if that is your choice. Start a family if you feel called, but it does not make you a superior person. Story 34. What car do they own? Unless they built or restored it with their own hands. Story 35. Staying busy all the time as if it were a medal instead of addressing real problems. Story 36. Their origins. How can someone be proud of something for which they are not responsible? Story 37. The grind. I work 3 jobs, 7 days a week, to have this 1-bedroom apartment in New York City. Bro. Story 38. She used to say how busy she was. I knew someone who would triple book herself just so she sounded popular and important. She always invited me to do things. After the second time she apologized, saying she had forgotten she had plans with someone else, I gave up. I would say sure but never actually commit. I went about my life. Story 39. I can get any man I want and can get married when I want. Just look at all these guys in my direct messages. No. As a woman, you control who has sexual access, but you do not control when commitment or marriage happens. It's unfortunate that some women still equate sexual access with serious commitment. 95% of those men are not taking you seriously when you are clothed. Story 40. Big, loud, expensive cars. First, nobody cares. Second, most of them are not even paid for. People lease cars they can barely afford and flaunt them like they are some big shot. I have rarely seen someone who actually saved money and paid for their expensive car show it off. Story 41. How rich they are usually means they either have wealthy parents or a job such as consulting. It's not a virtue. Story 42. Treating credit scores as if they determine your worth as a person. Story 43. Literally everything. You could post about getting your first job and there will be people patting themselves on the back for the 40 years wasted, breaking themselves and never seeing any of their family, as if it's a good thing. This is just life in 2025. Everyone has to one-up the next person or downplay what someone else is doing just to get a rush of dopamine and feel great about themselves. Bring back bullying. Story 44. Obviously money and material possessions. Other things include being an atheist, having a following, charisma with the opposite gender, and showing off by using their parents' money. Story 45. Some people travel to a foreign country and visit around 12 cities in a few days. Personally, I prefer to stay in one part of the country and have a deeper experience rather than feel rushed. Story 46. I paid $XXX for this. When someone brags about how expensive something is, it is not the flex you think it is. Story 47. Are they really bragging, just complaining, or trying to explain the reasons for their exhaustion? Story 48. Spending money to appear noble or heroic when that gesture is unnecessary. A cocky attitude at a new job in a new field. Copying others' accomplishments or hobbies and then mansplain how to do it properly when you have only been doing it for 2 days. Examples. Someone at a new job for a few months starts to slack off because they contracted to do similar work elsewhere and says, I did my time. An acquaintance has been looking for a house for 2 days and suddenly acts like an expert, telling everyone numbers, logistics, and strategy. Story 49. Chris Rock says he takes care of his children. Story 50. Owning an iPhone or another new phone is common. Brand new iPhones can be found in some parts of the world and are not status symbols. Story 51. Giant dong is literally minuscule compared to dolphin dongs. Story 52. When all of those bullshit internet intelligence quotient tests started popping up, I got quite a kick out of people bragging about scoring an 85 or a 90. Story 53. They are tough and do not tolerate nonsense. Empty barrels make the most noise. Story 54. When people act superior because of how they like their food, it bothers me. I do not care how hot you like your food, how rare you like your meat, what you put on your pizza, hamburger, or hot dog, or whether you enjoy slimy-looking foods. It does not make you a better person than anyone else. Eat what you like, let others enjoy what they like, and get the fuck over yourself. Story 55. I tell it like it is, or I am brutally honest, means you will be dealing with someone who will not accept feedback and will be rude all the time. Story 56. Chris Rock is bragging about feeding his kids. You are supposed to feed your kids. Story 57. We work non-stop. We treat busyness as proof of purpose, but it is often the opposite. The most grounded people I know move slowly with focus. They protect their time as if it were sacred because it is. They do not brag about chaos. They build quiet systems that allow them to think. It is not impressive to run yourself into the ground. What is impressive is staying awake to your own life, still noticing the smell of rain or the sound of your child laughing even when there is an email you have not answered. Story 58. Having children. Wow, someone wanted to have sex with you. Amazeballs. Story 59. Attending Ivy League schools doesn't necessarily indicate high intelligence. Rather, it often reflects the wealth and privilege of their parents. Story 60. How fast their car goes, how much horsepower it has, and so on. Neat pseudo-race car, but you drive on residential streets like everyone else. I bet getting stuck behind a school bus stings like a bee. Story 61. People who make being ghetto their entire personality expect others to be impressed that they grew up in government housing and never tried to get out. Story 62. An expensive car that they probably bought on credit will be worth 30% of what they paid when they sell it. It gets you from A to B. Congratulations. Story 63. They cook and look after their own children, mostly fathers. That is called being a parent, and it is something they should be doing. Your wife does it all the time while juggling everything else. Meanwhile, you are at home mostly on your phone but expect praise every time you do something you are supposed to be doing. Story 64. Not remembering what they did over the weekend is not impressive. It is concerning. Story 65. Accomplishments of young children. Wow. Your child can crawl, walk, and talk already? Your child can already operate light switches at that age? Amazing. Please tell me more. Do not hold back. I would love to see multiple photos and videos. Story 66. Some men boast about women they have hooked up with, as if they need external validation. Some Americans boast about owning guns, hunting, and other alpha male activities. Story 67. The places they have visited are not impressive. You bought a ticket and a hotel room. Story 68. I climbed Mount Everest and many mountaineers pollute it. Story 69. When people brag about their debuffs, such as injuries and illnesses, mental and physical, it comes across as boasting because there is usually no humility behind it and they often sound proud of their condition. Story 70. I knew a guy who constantly bragged that he followed the popular opinion among players in a massively multiplayer online game and that he was used as a reference for a dated mechanic in a raid. He is as insufferable as it sounds. Story 71. How much money someone has is none of my concern. Money never brings happiness. Story 72. Buying a car for its looks when it costs more than someone's annual salary is a bad financial decision. Story 73. My child is an honor student at XXXXXX elementary school. Story 74. Working non-stop without rest as if it were a badge of honor. Story 75. Spending large amounts of money can be pleasant when it allows you to buy high-quality items. But when prices are so high that it is no longer about quality and only about status, I think it is foolish, especially when people are merely pretending to be wealthy rather than actually owning substantial assets. Story 76. It always annoys me when someone brags about their taste, whether in movies, television, music, or sports. My friend, you did nothing. You merely latch onto the work of genuinely talented people. It is no achievement to brag that you only listen to a particular artist or type of music, only watch peak television shows, or support the currently dominant team. Story 77. How long can they edge for? Listen, buddy, that is an activity that should be started and stopped within the span of 5 minutes. There is no need to hold it in for 1 to 3 hours. Let it go. Story 78. their politics. The way people talk about politics often comes across as if they are smarter than others for having found something anyone could read in many other news articles. When they argue, it becomes a contest to see who can claim they are smarter most forcefully. All the while they solve nothing, make nothing better, and believe that internet likes mean anything. Story 79. The private school their child attends is a very common source of ego projection for parents in Australia. Yes, that is wonderful. Little so-and-so attends a $10,000, $20,000, or $30,000 per year school. That only shows that your child is a regular child whose parent pays for expensive daycare. Story 80. How wealthy their parents and grandparents are. I was never good at mathematics. Story 81. Tell me about what you do and how much money they have. A number is not interesting. Story 82. I have only killed one person in my life so far. Self-restraint. Story 83. When people talk about starting work, staying late, or not taking breaks, not having a work-life balance is not a flex. Story 84. People who go out and spend 300 to 400 pounds will not go without that much and do not consider it a good night unless they spend most of it. Story 85. When asked about his intelligence quotient, Stephen Hawking said, I don't know. Bragging about it is for losers. Story 86. I have 2 of the 3 Monopoly pieces. I need to win a big prize at McDonald's. Story 87. My brother-in-law was bragging about his new Genesis and that it gets 16 miles per gallon. That is not the flex he thinks it is. Story 88. Bragging about how much they travel is not particularly impressive. Getting on a plane and going to the beach is not noteworthy. Story 89. People who think being white or American-born is some sort of accomplishment. Story 90. I have a friend who often reminds us of his salary. I make about twice what he does. Story 91. How many times have they seen fish live? I have only seen them 72 times. What a newbie. Story 92. How many hours do they work? How much alcohol do they consume? Story 93. It's hard to date because men are intimidated by my success. No, they think you're an asshole. They're probably right. Story 94. They hustle, working several jobs. I am not referring to people who truly must work 2 or more jobs to keep food on the table, but to those who act as if working like a fool is something to brag about. Story 95. Waking up at 5 in the morning. Congratulations, you are just tired for longer. Story 96. How many hours do they work? If you need 60 hours a week to do your job, you are only admitting inefficiency. Story 97. Bragging about no sleep and exhaustion as if they equal productivity. It's not ambition. It's caffeine and denial in a business suit. Story 98. They eat very little, which is obviously not an adequate amount of food for the vast majority of the population. There is no prize for undereating, and it does not make you a better person. Story 99. Being anti-feminist or transphobic is not something to be proud of. It is sad how little people actually understand how feminism works and that it is not a giant man-hating movement. Yes, the issues that feminism addresses have changed, but not the movement itself. Modern problems require modern solutions. Feminism is no different. If you remove trans women from the equation, you do not support all women. Women's rights are not limited to one specific issue. They cover a varying range, especially when we consider women's rights and oppression across the globe, in countries such as the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Afghanistan, Sudan, Palestine, and others. Story 100. How rare they like their meat is a strange form of snobbery and one-upmanship, a particularly unimaginative kind. Story 101. Number of sexual partners. Sex isn't particularly hard to find, and collecting them is just gross. Story 102. How much alcohol he could consume. I remember a few years ago meeting a wiry, slightly built man in his 50s who boasted he could drink 17 pints in one night, and all I could think was, "You're killing yourself, you sad bastard." Story 103. They say they do not watch any television, as if they were more discerning and evolved than the average person. Story 104. They recognize a number of actors and celebrities in movies and shows. Story 105. The dysfunction in your family is not the impressive flex you think it is. Generally, if you have to tell people that you are a badass at something or that you are cool, it is a little sad. Story 106. They stayed up late last night and are very hungover at work. There are probably more issues, but those two are the main ones. Story 107. Women in their late 20s to early 30s brag about how young they look, being asked for identification, or being mistaken for younger people. Since I am in that age range, I hear it all the time. It would be more impressive in one's 50s or 60s, but for us it was not that long ago. Story 108. How many likes their pictures receive on Facebook. How much they drink. Story 109. There is a song in which a rapper brags that he took Xanax and then had a long nap on an airplane. Story 110. Saying that you are humble or talking about your own positive qualities feels off to me. I prefer to discover your good points myself rather than have you telegraph them to me. It is for me to decide how I see you, not for you to decide for me. Story 111. Wearing expensive clothes. Okay, you bought a $200 t-shirt. Cool, I guess. Story 112. People who claim to be brutally honest often use that as a justification for rudeness. You can be honest while still being compassionate. Story 113. People often brag about how clean they eat. There is nothing wrong with it, but bragging often implies that one way of eating is morally superior. People survive this long by eating all kinds of food. It is great if your diet is optimal, but not everyone can afford whole foods. I think it has more to do with economic class than with nutrition. Story 114. I am so good at lying. Wow, congratulations. I trust you even less now. Story 115. I am a Nobel laureate. So are 450 million other European Union citizens. Not Trump, though. Funny how that works. Story 116. Dicen ser brutalmente honestos cuando en realidad son solo groseros con mala autoestima. Story 117. They can function on little sleep, work hard, and be attractive. Congratulations. Try developing something within your control, such as intelligence. Story 118. How many people fancy them? It just screams insecurity if you feel the need to tell others you are wanted. Story 119. Sense of fashion. I saw a TikTok recently claiming a girl's worst fear is having a swag gap in a relationship. That sounds absurd when you consider the purpose of clothing and how capitalism has used fashion to display the wealth gap, since garments are ultimately just pieces of fabric. Story 120. Their loud car or motorcycle annoys everyone except young children and people with cognitive impairments. You are not proving anything. You are only damaging your hearing and accumulating debt. Story 121. Getting so wasted that you vomited into your beer and drank it? No, I feel bad for how sad your life is. Story 122. Having sex with anything that breathes and stands on two legs either results in pregnancy or in contracting a new disease that they get to name. Story 123. How early do you wake up? People say they wake up at 4 in the morning and go to bed at 8 in the evening, and they look at me as if I am lazy for waking up at 8 and going to bed at midnight. Story 124. When people brag about how gifted their child is, ugh, shut the fuck up. Story 125. How many injuries people have suffered from sports or other activities. You would think that if a person keeps getting injured, they would learn and stop. But they do not. Story 126. Bragging about committing petty theft and not getting caught. Story 127. Not caring about what others think can be healthy. Don't get me wrong. It's reasonable not to let every opinion affect you. However, many people use this idea as an excuse to act selfishly and ignore the repercussions of their words and actions on others. Story 128. Americans bragging about being able to drive a manual transmission. Story 129. People who brag about how well they can handle the cold while putting others down are frustrating. I recently had a conversation with someone who said that people are so pathetically fragile that they cannot handle 30 degrees Fahrenheit without feeling cold, and I responded that I shiver if it is under 80 degrees Fahrenheit. At first he tried to put me down by calling me miserable, but I said that even in the summer I use 4 blankets and still cannot feel my fingers. He realized how pointless it was to keep bragging when I was on a whole different scale. Story 130. A high grade point average does not define a person. Many intelligent people do not do well in school because they were raised in difficult environments or because of disabilities and mental health issues. Most employers do not care about your grade point average. Story 131. How many countries have they visited? You saw all the tourist traps. Congratulations. Story 132. How little they eat. I haven't eaten anything today. Yeah, I can tell. You're very pale and have been irritable all day. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.